User-friendly is a phrase you hear a lot these days, and in the case of lipless crankbaits, user-friendly applies nicely. But this simple-to-use bait is often misunderstood or not used at all because its advantages are not fully understood. In this video, 19-time Bassmasters Classic qualifier Tommy Martin will take you out on the water and show you cast by cast and fish by fish the proper tackle, bait, colors, patterns, and techniques he has used through 30 years of world-class tournament experience. Experience that takes lipless crankbaits to the limit. Filmed entirely on famed Toledo Bend Reservoir in East Texas, this video will show you why many of the lipless crankbait patterns apply to all areas of the country, including your favorite lake. Here's how to improve your bass fishing skills.
This one's live, he's kicking. There we go. Look at there, boy, I'll tell you what, that is a nice fish. I have to use the pliers here to get him off. These hooks, when you get them embedded in the roof of the mouth, you've got to have a good pair of needle nose pliers to dislodge these hooks. Let him go back where he can play again another day. Well, that was a nice fish on a lipless crankbait. You know, these baits are fun to fish. They're very productive. They're easy to fish. They're really user-friendly. Just about everybody fishes them. Pro fishermen even use them. I mean, a lot of tournaments are won with the lipless crankbaits. I'm going to show you all the tricks that I've learned over a period of years, and hopefully we're going to make you a better lipless crankbait fisherman. Let me define lipless crankbaits for you. Lipless crankbaits are any crankbait that doesn't have a bill. This bait doesn't dive. It runs flat in the water, so to speak. The depth that a lipless crankbait will run is actually determined by how fast you make the retrieve. Lures like rattle traps, like the diamond shad, like the hot spot, all these lures are classified as lipless crankbaits. In the last few years, lots of fishermen, pro fishermen, just average fishermen, all sorts of fishermen are using lipless crankbaits because they are very effective, they're user-friendly, and they just catch a lot of bass. They're primarily used in flat water. What I mean by flat water is lakes that have gradual sloping banks where you can keep that bait in the strike zone for longer periods of time. And they're used on the flats and on points and anywhere from a foot to about 7 foot of water, and boy are they effective on bass. Well, lipless crankbaits have been around for years. You know, going back 30, 40 years ago, the longest I can remember they've been around. Started out with the bio boogies, the pico perches, the swimming minnows. Those were the very first lipless crankbaits that I can recall, and I remember fishing with those years and years ago, back in the mid-60s when I first started bass fishing. Since then, about early 1970s came the hot spot, and then the rattle trap, now the rattle and rapala, the diamond shad. There's just a wide variety of lipless crankbaits you can fish with. But for some reason, probably because it catches a lot of fish, the rattle trap has been a real catchy lure that just lots of fishermen are using this bait, and because it has a loud rattle to it, and it also catches a lot of bass. One of the things I like about lipless crankbaits is they come in a number of different sizes, which makes it great because certain times of the year, the smaller sizes tend to work a lot better. Other times of the year, I want to use the larger sizes. And it's a known fact that larger baits tend to catch bigger fish, but at times, you know, the little baits are very productive and you can catch a lot of fish on them too. Now, each specific weight lure requires a special type of rod and reel, in my opinion, to fish this lure properly. Just like the half ounce, we'll start out with the middle one, the half ounce size lipless crankbait. I like to fish it on about a 6 foot, medium action, cranking type rod, and I'll use line tests varying from 14-pound test up to 20, because remember, these crankbaits are lipless crankbaits. Don't get them confused with those that have a bill. The ones that have a bill, a lot of times pro fishermen and all good fishermen would want to use a lighter line to try to get that lure to go deeper, achieve a greater depth with that lure. But you're not trying to do that with a lipless crankbait, because the depth that it will run is purely depends on how fast you reel this lure. And I use 20-pound test line a whole lot of times because I'm fishing in and around a lot of heavy aquatic weeds and old dead cattails and things like that, and I just want to use heavy line with them. So I'll go from 14 to 20 with the 1/2 ounce size. Let's go to the bigger size here, the 3/4 ounce lipless crankbait. When I'm using it, I go up to a little bit longer rod. I like a 7-foot medium action cranking type rod. And again, I'll use from 14 to 20-pound test line. A lot of times I'm using 20-pound test. I like this big long rod with the 3/4 ounce so I can get a lot of distance with my cast. Also, the longer rod allows me to have more leverage for my hook sets on those long casts, and I can actually just rip the bait through the grass when it kind of gets lodged in the aquatic weeds under the water. So there's a special rod for just about every one of these baits. Now we'll go down to the smaller one. All 3 of these baits work at various times of the year, and I use them a lot. I keep one of each size rigged all the time. When I'm using the little bitty 1/4 ounce lipless crankbait, I go to a 6-foot rod again. The only thing that's a lot different about this one, since the bait is quite a lot lighter and smaller, you want to go to 10-pound test line, use a much lighter line so it doesn't take away from the action of this great little lure. And this lighter rod and the lighter line lets that little lure work like it's supposed to, and you'll catch a lot of fish on this bait, I promise you. Come on in here, don't you get off. There you go. Isn't that a pretty bass? Looky here. I'm using a 3/4 ounce lipless crankbait, and the reason I'm using a 3/4 ounce right now is because the lake has come up about 4 feet in the last few weeks because of a lot of rain, and the grass tops, or the top of the grass is down about 4 to 5 feet under the water, and I need this heavier bait to get me down to where I can just tip the top of that grass, because that's where the bass are hiding. They're hiding in that grass. And this time of the year, during pre-spawn in February, January, February, March, I use the 3/4 ounce a lot because it is heavier and it will get down deeper, and I use the 1/2 ounce a lot. But going into the fall, you know, into early fall and on into early fall, mid-fall, and early winter, I go to a little 1/4 ounce a whole lot, because if you'll think about it, in the fall, the water starts to recede and drop, and when that happens, the grass edges are a lot shallower. So I like the little 1/4 ounce bait. It does a good job in the fall. Let's see if we can catch another one. Here you come. Atta boy, come on in here. Well, there's another one fell victim, this lipless crankbait. I'll tell you what, these baits are fun to use and they're easy. That's why so many people fish with them, is they're just simple to fish with. But not only the only reason, another reason is they're very productive. They just catch lots of fish, especially during the pre-spawn. These baits all they do is they're so simple to use. You throw them out and reel them back. You just have to figure out the speed of retrieve the bass want. And generally speaking, they're more effective, of course, when the bass are in somewhat open water and not holding tight to cover, and they're willing to chase something. But these baits have a lot of rattle, a lot of fish attraction. They just attract fish. The different colors they come in, and the vibration this lure makes. It just moves a lot of water as it vibrates through the water as you pull it back. And they're just real fish catchers. Everybody loves to use a lipless crankbait. They're fun to use and they catch a lot of bass. Lipless crankbaits are good on just about any type of lake, but they're a lot better on flatland lakes, lakes like Rayburn, Toledo Bend, and any lake that's in the flatland where they have real gradually sloping type banks, because these baits don't have a bill and they can't dive, and even at just a medium retrieve, they only run 2 or 3 foot under the surface. So on flat lakes that have gradual banks that just slope off, you keep this bait in the strike zone all the time. More vertical type lakes that are in the mountainous terrain, like Table Rock or Bull Shoals, those type of lakes, where the banks drop off real abruptly, this bait is only in the strike zone a short period of time, so they're not near as effective. You know, most fishermen, they really seem to dislike the wind, and they just don't like to fish in the wind. But actually the wind, it helps you to catch fish a lot of times, especially in the spring when the bass are moving up into shallow water. The wind, a good ripple on the water will bring bait fish in towards the shore. It takes a glare from the sun off the water where they just strike your baits better with a little bit of wind action. But today we've got about a 20-25 mile an hour wind, and the wind can hurt you too, because it keeps you from being able to maneuver your boat and work your boat with a trolling motor the way you want to. So what I'm doing, I use the wind to my advantage when it's blowing hard. I'm not going to fish out in the full force of it, right out in a gale of wind. What I'm going to do is get back in coves and pockets and places that should have bass this time of the year, and I'm going to use the wind to my advantage. I'm not going to try to go against it, troll against it. I'm going to troll with it and just kind of slow my drift down as I troll with the wind with the trolling motor, and let the, I'm not in the full force of the wind back in here where I'm at, but I'm using the wind to my advantage, letting it push me down this bank, and again taking the lipless crankbait, making numerous casts, just working this water real thoroughly. But the wind's good. Wind will help you catch fish. Just don't be afraid of the wind, and don't be afraid to use it to your advantage as a fisherman. Show you a few things about the hook set using a lipless crankbait. Now I keep the rod tip down on my normal retrieve, trying to get the bait down just a little bit deeper, and when I do get a strike, I just sweep the rod like this, come back on it. And the reason I do that, with these treble hooks, if you'll think about it, and you reeling this bait fairly fast, just the bait moving towards you and the impact of a fish hitting it, a lot of times you could actually probably not even have to sweep the rod, but I feel it's necessary because fish hit this bait at different angles. Some of them hit it coming from the side, some of them hit it coming from this way and go directly against you, and those are easy to catch. But buddy, when one comes up from behind it and hits it and knocks slack in it and carries the bait towards you, then that sweep is absolutely necessary, because when you sweep that rod and you hit that fish, you have to keep reeling to catch up with him and keep a tight line or he'll get off. So always make that sweep. When you feel that bass hit, just sweep that rod. Put the butt into your stomach like this and make that sweep. Just pull back on it. Let's catch another one. Well, I like to use lipless crankbaits. Basically they're good anytime bass are in shallow water, but I really like them during the cooler water periods of the year, like in early spring when the water has been extremely cold during the winter, and it starts its warming trend in late January and February, and usually the water temperature is 53, 54, and temperatures like that on these Texas reservoirs. The lipless crankbait seems to be at its best because it has a real tight wiggle. It doesn't have a wide wobble, and that's what triggers bass into striking, that real tight wiggle in extremely cold water or cooler water. Then again, in early fall when the water starts to cool off after summer months, and on into mid-fall and on into early winter, even before the water gets extremely cold and drives the bass deep, the lipless crankbait again is very, very good because it has that tight wiggle which triggers strikes from bass when the water's cold. Another great thing about lipless crankbaits, they catch not only largemouth bass, they're really great largemouth lures, but they work extremely well on spotted bass, and they work real good on smallmouth bass also. It's just a very effective lure on all three species of bass. Well, I think color is important when you're fishing lipless crankbaits, just like any other lure, jerk baits, plastic worms, lizards, or anything else. Color plays a big part in it. In early spring, pre-spawn period, like we're fishing right now, I like the reds and the oranges and the crawdad colored baits. I think these are especially good. Sometimes a chartreuse color will work very, very well. And chrome blue back, that color is always good, especially when the sun's out. I'll go to those sometimes, but I'll alternate in colors and experiment. And every fisherman should experiment with colors, because kind of every day is a little bit different. The amount of light that we have, how bright the sun actually is, the amount of wave action, the amount of wind you have, all of that plays a part into color and what the fish see and how they see these colors under the water. But the oranges and reds are definitely great in the springtime and later on in the fall, like in early winter when bass are feeding real heavily on shad. I go more to the chrome blue back, chrome black back, more shad patterns that time of the year. But again, I keep it pretty simple and I don't use a whole lot of different colors. In this particular video, we're catching all largemouth bass because we're on Toledo Bend Lake down in the eastern part of Texas, and there just aren't any smallmouth here. But lipless crankbaits work extremely well on smallmouth bass and Kentucky spotted bass. Now, I travel a lot up in the northern part of the United States, and we encounter a lot of smallmouth up in that country. And I'll tell you what, two colors of lipless crankbaits that these are even right on the verge of being, I guess you'd say, pretty gaudy, right? But they work on smallmouth. They like wild colors. There's something about wild colors and that real clear water that just triggers smallmouth into striking and smashing the lure. Like on spinnerbaits, you know, we change to the chartreuse type blades, the most chartreuse blades we can find. We go to white blades, and there's something about these gaudy colors that smallmouth love. Try them when you're fishing around smallmouth. Try these gaudy colors and see if they don't help you to catch more smallmouth bass. There you go. That's a nice fish. Looky here. All right, now let me show you exactly what I'm doing with the lipless crankbait and how I'm making this retrieve. I'm throwing the bait up into about 2 foot of water, and I'm bringing it out into about 7. So what I want to do when I throw it in that shallow water is control the depth the bait runs. And what I do, or how I do that, how I achieve that, is make the long cast out into the shallows, hold the rod tip up like this, and start my retrieve where I can control the bait and keep it out of the grass. Once it clears the grass and gets out in a little deeper water, 3 to 4 feet, I lower the rod tip and start my normal retrieve and just bring the bait right on in. But that, by holding that rod tip up, it just allows you to keep the bait out of the grass and then make your retrieve and get the bait across the productive zone. As I mentioned earlier, when I'm fishing lipless crankbaits, the only modification I make is I change the hooks, and I go to the triple grip trebles, and these triple grip treble hooks actually hook the fish so good that it's an absolute necessity that you have a real good pair of needle nose pliers, because the way the hook point is bent back in towards the shank, you have to have something pretty skinny and strong where once you hook that fish, and a lot of times I have both hooks in him, I can just grab that hook and pull up and pull out. Of course, at the same time, you're having just a real good grip on that fish, because you don't want to let him thrash around or jump around. You want to have control of the fish and slam one of these hooks into you. But a pair of pliers, good pair of needle nose pliers, is just a tool that you must have in your boat when you're fishing crankbaits, and especially with these triple grip hooks. Well, the water temperature is about 53 to 54 degrees, and the conditions pretty overcast today. It's not the most idealistic day for early February and catching these pre-spawn bass, but we're going to do the best we can today. Now, I'm concentrating on these inside weed lines. We're here on Toledo Bend Lake. It's early February, and the bass are really just on a pre-spawn movement, moving in towards the shore, moving into the coves and little sharp pockets where they'll eventually spawn. And what they do, since this lake has an abundance of hydrilla grass, and the inside grass line in this part of the lake that we're fishing, which is actually about the center of the lake, the inside grass lines are 7 to 8 feet deep, and the outside grass lines are about 13 to 15 foot deep. So the bass generally hold up on the backside or the inside grass lines in about 7 to 8 feet of water, because we just recently had some rain and the water rose about 2 or 3 feet. But I'd rather have some sunshine today and it be a little bit warmer, but we're going to keep looking for them, and what I'm doing is just going in and out of these little pockets and following this inside grass line and making long casts with these lipless crankbaits and retrieving them fairly fast. Now, the water's pretty clear, and you might think because the water's cold you'd want to retrieve them slow, but that's not the case. I have a lot more success in fishing these baits fairly fast. Well, it's a little bit overcast today, and we're doing a lipless crankbait video, so naturally we're going to fish with lipless crankbaits. But if I were in a tournament probably today, I might use a deeper running bait, something that would get down 5 or 6 foot deep, because generally when it's overcast like this in February and early pre-spawn, the bass want to go down more towards the bottom. They'll lay closer to the bottom even in 5 foot of water, and they're not near as aggressive on an overcast day. You take a real bright sunny day, it brings the fish up towards the surface. They want to come up towards the surface, And boy, it puts them right in the range of these lipless crankbaits. That's when these are so effective, when we get those real sunshiny days. And hopefully tomorrow we'll have some sunshine. We're just working our way in and out of these little dead-end pockets here and trying to follow the inside edge of the weeds, the aquatic vegetation. I'm trying to stay right on the inside of the grass, and I'm looking for these bass to be situated and positioned right on the inside of the grass, or somewhere in between the inside of the grass and up here in about 3 or 4 foot of water close to bank where they'll eventually spawn. And I'm just covering a lot of water, throwing a trap and just working this water real thoroughly. And the way I'm staying on the inside edge of the weeds is by watching my locator. I've got a flasher up front, of course, with the transducer on the trolling motor. That's very important and critical to have that transducer on the trolling motor, where you're looking at the bottom right under where you're fishing, right under where the boat is or where you're moving the boat to. And I'm staying in about 7 to 8 foot right on the inside of the weeds and just casting up and down these weeds, looking for these pre-spawn bass to move into this area. You know, these inside weed lines are pretty obvious to guys that fish a lot like myself, but to someone that doesn't fish every day, and that applies to a lot of people, the inside weed lines are not that obvious. And again, what I'm doing is watching my depth finder very closely for weed growth. And when I'm in about 7 or 8 foot, I can see little blips that are going up on the depth finder all the way up in 3 and 4 foot, and that indicates grass, aquatic weeds that are growing up off of the bottom. And it's not real apparent to every fisherman like it is to myself, but you have to watch your locator very carefully and make sure you stay precisely on the inside of the weeds, because it's the little bitty things that pro fishermen do that make them catch more fish than the average fisherman. Oh man. Now that's the way I like them to bite. That one loaded up on it. I mean, that one took it. I just changed to a 1/2 ounce lipless crankbait. I went down in size a little bit, and sometimes that'll help too, but I don't want the bait to go real deep. The grass is pretty, that's a good fish. He's really pulling. Got to be careful with this one. Let that old rod work and let the fish play. That's what you're waiting on anyway. You want to let him play. You wait all day to get one on, so let him have a little fun. Let him wallow around, tire himself out. Oh, that's a nice fish. Now I'm going to get down here. That fish will approach 4 pounds. I'm going to get down here, and I'm not going to hoist this one in. I've got 20-pound line, but I'm going to try to catch this one in the side of the gills. Now you want to be very careful when you lip a fish using a lipless crankbait or any plug that has treble hooks, because they can certainly throw these hooks right into you. Once he quits fighting though, I just reach down and grab him in the gills like this and just lift him up. That's all you have to do. Don't try to catch him in the mouth. Just put your hands inside his gills and lift him up like this, and you've got him. That's a nice fish. Get the pliers. Got both trebles in him again. Once you get them on these triple grips, these triple grip treble hooks, boy, they just hold them and they can't get away from you. It just traps them on the bait. Now that is a pretty bass. That's a female getting ready to spawn. That's a pretty one. Turn her loose. There we go. That's 4 out of this one little area. I've caught 4 fish just right in here where they're feeding on these shad. And like I said, I laid off of it a minute ago and kind of let the shad regroup and went back over and first cast in there, bango. Another real good fish, about 4 pounds. Get my line undone here, and we'll go back in and see if we can get another one. Oh, look at there. There we go. Oh! Well, even with the best treble hooks, you're going to lose one every now and then. I thought I had that one coming my way, but he just got away from me. You're going to lose one every now and then. That's okay. We'll get another one. Schooling there. There's several fish in this place. Look at there. Come on in. You don't want to play them too hard with these treble hook lures. Let them run when they want to run. They're the boss. Let them do what they want to do. Try not to get too excited and fight them too hard. That's a nice little fish. I'm gonna let him run and get him headed this way. Now, he's one of these kind, like I said, you can just bring these right over the side. Once you get them worked down a little bit and let that rod tip play them down, get them headed your way, just bring them right on up and over. There we go. Lay him down in the bottom of the boat. There again, these old hooks have him good. These fish are, there's a little school of fish right here. I noticed this when I was trolling into this cove. I saw a bass strike a shad over here right in the corner of this little pocket, and it put me onto this area. I may not have even cast so far back into the shallow water with the lipless crankbait, but you know, there's a lot of signs that will, or a lot of things that will happen as you fish along out on the lake, and you always have to be on the look for those little signals and signs that will tell you that there's fish in the area. And there are fish in this area. This is the second one I've caught out of that area. I'm gonna get him off real quick and not hurt him. He was hooked with both trebles too. We'll let him go, or we can catch him again another day. Well, I've been talking about hydrilla all day, and this is hydrilla. This is what the fish hide in here on Toledo Bend Lake and a lot of other reservoirs across, especially here in Texas. But in the southern part of the United States, there's a lot of hydrilla in these lakes, a lot of milfoil. Now, if you're fishing a northern reservoir up in Michigan or Wisconsin or New York, Vermont, somewhere up that part of the country, it'll look like this probably, but it may be a coontail moss, or it may be some type of northern aquatic weed. And a lot of these aquatic weeds grow anywhere from 3 or 4 foot of water all the way out to 15, 18 foot of water. And I'll tell you what, bass love them, the bait fish get in them, and naturally the game fish stay in there after those bait fish. So it's good cover and a good place to fish. There he is. Look at there. Even in this cold water, these fish are really jumping. They're really fighting hard. Well, we've worked pretty hard today to get into an area that has any fish. I don't know, we've probably trolled maybe 2 miles on that trolling motor, but we found them now. Come on in here. Ah, dog, wait a minute. There we go. I nearly pulled a boo-boo then. I didn't have enough slack out of my line, but I got him in. That's a good fish. Like I just said, we've covered a lot of water this morning. I mean, we've trolled for probably 2 miles on that trolling motor. And this time of the year, during the pre-spawn, when bass are moving back into the little pockets and stuff and getting ready to set up for spawning, it's not unusual for them to be real scattered, and you may have to, or you probably will have to cover a lot of water to find the fish. And that's what I've done this morning. I've just covered a lot of water and had very little action. We've caught 2 or 3 fish before we got here, and we pull in this one little old pocket, and we've caught like 5 or 6 and lost 1. So the fish are really in here. It makes it all worthwhile once you get in the right area. And that just goes to show you, you got to keep, if the fish aren't biting, somewhere on the lake they will bite. Just keep trolling around and keep looking for them. I'm just fishing about 6 to 7 foot of water and using a medium retrieve. As you can see by watching my hand speed here, I'm not reeling it real slow nor real fast. The water is a little bit off colored because we've had a lot of rain, so I started using a medium retrieve. Normally now if the water were clear, I'd be reeling extremely fast. I'd be using a fast retrieve. But since the water is a little bit dingy and just a little bit off colored, and what I mean by that, to give you an idea, I can see down about 1.5 to 2 foot. And normally on Toledo Bend here this time of year, if the water's clear, you can see down about 3 or 4 foot. So the water is a little dingy, and I'm using that medium retrieve, and it's working. Really, there's nothing different looking about this little area. We're just in the back kind of a little old bitty pocket right off the main lake. And the only thing different about it, I guess, is there's some fish in here that are willing to strike our bait today. And probably the reason for it, if you'll notice, if you can see it, there's a little shad activity on the surface where there's a lot of bait fish in this area. And of course, bass are no different than humans. They want to eat. And when food is available, they get a little bit active, and they're chasing these bait fish all around this cove. And every time I can get that lipless crankbait right up there in amongst them, I can get a bite. See if I can catch another one. There's the shad. The shad are moving right over there. Watch, oh, look at there. Look at that. Bass are hitting the shad. Isn't that something? Now, that's a little bit unusual for this early in the year in February to see them do this, but they're actually chasing bait fish. Well, I threw right in the middle of them. Didn't happen that cast. All right, let's try them again. Fish on, another fish. Oh, he's running right at me. I've got to reel fast to keep up with this one. There he is, I got him now. He wants to run right at me and try to throw that lure. That's a nice fish. They're all about the same size. These are just real chunky, probably male bass moving back in here. Here we go, come on in here. Both hooks again. Boy, it's nothing more fun to catch one right after the other. And that's when once you get in them, you know, makes it all worthwhile, all that time you spent looking for them. And that's what you do most of the time. You're not catching, you're fishing. When you find fish chasing shad like this in a little pocket or anywhere, you know, you can maximize the number of fish that you can catch by, after you catch a couple of them and kind of disrupt things, and you know, those fish are going to jump and thrash the water and make a lot of commotion and noise. It kind of spooks the shad, the bait fish that they're feeding on, and puts them down again. What I generally do is keep my boat well away from the area. I want to take the trolling motor and troll out and keep it away from that area and let it settle down just a few minutes and let those shad kind of group back up. The bait fish will group back up, and then as you just saw, the fish will come back into them. They'll start feeding on them again, and that way you can throw back in there 2 or 3 more times and catch you 2 or 3 more fish, which you can't do if you just sit there on them and keep throwing and keep throwing. The shad won't come back up. So you got to kind of move off of them a little bit, and that's what I've done. I think they're ready now for us to move back in there and see if we can catch another one. Well, I just checked the water temperature again, and it's 53.7 out here on the main lake, and it was 53.3 degrees back in the little pockets and things I'd been fishing earlier where I had no results, no strikes. I've caught 2 fish since I moved out on the open lake. You know, a temperature gauge this time of the year especially is very important, because what I'm looking for is the warmest water temperature I can find. And where you'll find that warmer water temperature generally in early spring are those banks that are protected from the north wind like we're on here. This bank is protected and it is a little bit warmer, and without a temperature gauge I'd never know that, so it's an important tool to have in your boat. Not a big fish, but he is a fish. Well, that's not exactly what we're looking for. That one's a little bit on the small side. But I'm using pretty heavy line on these lipless crankbaits, about 20-pound test line. And you know, this size fish, of course, and up to about 3 pounds with 20-pound test line, I just wait till I get him coming towards the boat and get the momentum right of the fish where he's headed towards the boat, and let the rod kind of play him out, and then just heave him right on over the side. Just bring him right over the side of the boat and into the boat. That's the best way to land them. Don't play around with them and play with them in the water. Put them in the boat, then you can play with them. Let's catch us another one. Well, these fish are actually chasing shad, just like I said, back in this little pocket, which is a little bit unusual for pre-spawn fish to do. You don't see that all the time. And the lipless crankbait is really perfect for this type of situation. Now, I can't explain this exactly. If you'll notice, I'm using a red bait. Red is always good this time of the year, early in the year, January and February and early March. I use a lot of reds and oranges and crawdad colored lipless crankbaits. And the bass are feeding on shad. You can see them busting shad, and shad are silver. But the thing about the lipless crankbait is the water that I'm taking these fish out of is about 4 to 5 foot deep, and it's got a lot of underwater aquatic weeds, and you couldn't throw any other bait in there. Crankbait with a bill on it or anything like that would dive right down into the grass, and you'd be immediately lodged and you couldn't fish it. So this is a perfect setup and situation for lipless crankbaits. Well, we've been fishing quite a while this morning, and we've covered a lot of water. I fished back in the pockets, out on the points of the little pockets going back in. I'm just looking for fish this morning. I haven't been on the lake in quite some time, and we're just really hunting these fish and trying to establish some form of a pattern. Now, in the last 15 minutes, I've had 2 strikes. I've caught 2 fish on the lipless crankbait, and both of them have just come off of straight main lake banks, with an inside grass line that's in about 6 or 7 foot of water, and still I'm using that medium retrieve with the lipless crankbait and just keeping that steady retrieve, and we're starting to make contact with a few fish. So this tells me that, and it should tell you as a fisherman, that this area here, it has some fish that can be caught. So I'm going to work it a little bit more thoroughly and slow down and really fish hard and see if I can get another one to bite. Now, the little area that boat's fishing right now is precisely where we just caught 6 or 7 real good bass on the lipless crankbait. Now, as you can see, the mistake this fisherman's making, he moved his boat in too close to the bank, and he's throwing his bait into extremely shallow water, and he's already spooked the bait fish where the bass were out there jumping on the bait fish. He's already spooked them, and he's not going to catch any of those fish. He wasn't real observant. If he'd have been real observant and watched the back of that cove and kept his boat out in the proper position, he would have seen those bass striking the bait fish, and he would have done the same thing we did. He would have caught some of them. But he just made a typical mistake and got in too close to the bank, and as a result, he's not going to catch any fish. So boat positioning is really, really important. Well, it's been a real interesting day, of course, for lipless crankbait fishing this time of the year, early February. We're on Toledo Bend Lake. I'd a lot rather seen it be real bright and sunny with just a little bit of wind. Those are perfect conditions for fishing the lipless crankbait in early pre-spawn. But we had cloudy, overcast weather today, and actually it kept the water temperature down. We never saw water temperature above 54 degrees, but we made a pretty good day out of it. We covered a lot of water, fished the inside edges of the grass between the bank and the inside edge of the hydrilla. So that means we fished from about 7 foot into about 3 foot, and I concentrated on those areas, making long casts with a 3/4 ounce and also a 1/2 ounce red shad type trap. And we found one particular pocket. You know, you spend a lot of time looking for fish and very little time catching them, but I found one particular pocket that had a lot of shad in the back of it, and the bass were actually kind of feeding and schooling on those shad, which is real unusual for this time of the year. But it enabled us to catch 6 or 7 bass out of that one location, and then we picked up several stragglers as we trolled along. But the whole key to catching fish this time of the year is, remember, they're probably going to be scattered, cover a lot of water, keep chunking, watch for those natural signs like bait fish moving in the water or bass hitting bait fish, and you never know what'll happen. When I'm tying my lures on, I like to tie directly to the split ring. Whether I'm fishing this lipless crankbait or just any plug, I want to tie directly to that lure. I feel like it makes a better connection. I don't like using the snaps, and I have more confidence that I get better action out of the plug this way, and I feel more confident that if I do hook a big old bass, I'm going to be able to land him. Right now we're fishing early February, and these are all pre-spawn bass, and of course the bass are shallow. We're catching them 3 to 6 foot deep, and lipless crankbaits are great baits anytime the bass are in shallow water. But you know, they're not just spring baits. You know, I've catch a lot of fish on lipless crankbaits during the fall months when they're feeding on shad real heavily, like October and November, and then on into December. Like this past year over at Sam Rayburn Reservoir in December, the first week we had the Bass Invitational over there, and I caught all my bass during that tournament on a rattle trap in 2 to 5 foot of water. So until the water gets real cold, say around 55, maybe 54 degrees in the winter, and drives the fish down into deeper water, the lipless crankbait is just a great bait. Anytime the bass are in shallow water, it's a good bait to be throwing. I'll talk a little bit here. There we go. I just moved out of the cove here, moved out on this point, and we catch another fish. Those other fish were kind of back in that pocket, but they're scattered all through here. This time of year, a lot of the fish are migrating and they're moving into these spawning coves. I've just had to have the pliers to get every one of these loose. These hooks are doing their homework. There we go. But fish generally, this time of year, fish are real scattered. You're not going to find, normally you just don't find big concentrations of fish. They're scattered, they're moving in to spawn. Some of them will be on the points, some of them will be on the sides of the cove, some of them will be in the back of the coves. The main thing is just stay on that trolling motor, figure out the precise depth of water, like 4 to 5 foot, 6 foot, whatever it may be that you're getting most of your strikes in, and keep that trolling motor moving real slow and cover the water real thoroughly with the lipless crankbait, and you're going to catch bass this time of year. These baits are super bass catchers, they're easy to use, and they're fun to use. The lake's come up about 4 foot here in the last few weeks, and of course this is early February and the bass are on a pre-spawn movement. They're just moving into these pockets and coves, and I'm fishing a lipless crankbait, a 3/4 ounce one. The reason I'm fishing a little bit heavier lipless crankbait is so I can get out and tick the top of the grass. You know, the bass like to hide and they just lay in those weeds, right in the top of the weeds. And what you want to do is run the bait as close to the bass as you can, because if they don't have very far to move for the bait, you'll get a lot more strikes by doing that. So as a result, I'm just slowing this 3/4 ounce lipless crankbait down, and I'm ticking the top of the grass, hoping to aggravate those bass and get some strikes that way, and it's working pretty good. Well, we just caught a couple of fish off of this point right here coming out of that little pocket, and I'm working down this straight bank now. We're just off the inside edge of the grass. In fact, I'm in about 8 foot of water, and I'm on the inside edge of the grass, and I'm just casting this lipless crankbait in toward shore and covering that depth range from 3 foot all the way out to 6 foot. I'm in a big old bay here. This is a spawning bay. It's a place that a lot of bass are going to spawn. This is early February. They're not spawning yet. They're moving in here though. It's a good pre-spawn movement going on right now. And I'm just covering a lot of water. You got to keep that trolling motor moving, keep moving up and down these banks and covering water. And one of the advantages of fishing with lipless crankbaits, when the bass are aggressive and willing to chase a bait, you can cover a lot of water and you can cover it efficiently, and it'll catch a lot of bass for you. Just keep that trolling motor going and keep casting and keep working this lure, and you're going to run into some bass somewhere. Well, what I'm doing with the boat here as far as boat positioning, I'm just trying to keep the boat in between the inside grass edge and where the brush starts close to bank here, and the inside grass edge is in about 7 to 8 foot of water, and then it just gradually gets shallower as you move on up, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, right up to the brush line in the bank. And you've got about a 40-yard area in between the inside grass edge and where the brush starts. And since the lake is up and higher than normal, higher than I'd really like it to be for lipless crankbaits to make it just super good fishing, I'm just wandering around in that area between the inside grass edge and where the brush starts. I'm just zigzagging back and forth with the boat, making long casts with the lipless crankbait, and trying to use a medium retrieve to get the bait down, because most of the fish I'm taking are coming out of 5 foot of water. And I've established that by catching 4 or 5 different fish in 5 foot, so I'm certainly concentrating on that 5 foot depth. Well, we're concentrating our efforts this morning back in a big old cove out of that strong north wind. We got about a 20-25 mile an hour north wind blowing this morning. It's bright and sunny, just an excellent day, unless it's, other than the fact it's a little bit too windy. Normally this time of year in early February, when the bass are on a pre-spawn movement, I'll do a lot of fishing out on Main Lake Flats on Toledo Bend and Sam Rayburn and a lot of these East Texas lakes. The Main Lake Flats, where you've got grass growing about 3 foot under the water, are extremely good this time of the year in early February. But today it's just too windy, and as of recently, we've had about a 4 foot rise in water. We've had a lot of rain, and the lake's a little bit high right now, so there's actually more vegetation, aquatic vegetation, closer to the surface, back in the coves and pockets right off the main lake, and that's the primary reason I'm concentrating my efforts back in these coves, and it's paying off for us this morning. Most of the time rattles are good. I'd say at least 95% of the time you want your baits to rattle. You want rattle chambers in them. And that's why they call this the rattle trap, is because, buddy, it rattles. It's got lots of rattle to it. And that's good, like I said, about 95% of the time. There are a few rare exceptions when the lakes get real calm. The water's just a dead calm, no wind blowing. The water's extremely clear and fairly shallow, and you have bass up in there that you're trying to catch and you know they're there. These rattling baits just have an adverse effect to get them too much noise in that real calm, clear water, and they won't hit them. So what I do is switch to a balsa wood type lure, and I found that I can still catch these bass, but just eliminate the noise. That's one time when a noise factor is a negative and it won't work for you. So I just totally eliminate that noise and go to a balsa wood bait, and then I can catch fish on it in clear, calm water. Well, this particular bank is pretty steep right here. It drops off real fast, so of course all the fish are coming out of about 5 foot of water, and what I'm doing is paralleling this bank, getting real close to the bank and making my cast with the lipless crankbait straight up and down the bank, trying to keep that bait in 5 foot of water at all times. By paralleling, I can do this, and I just keep the bait in the strike zone longer, and that way your chances are a lot better of catching more bass. Well, we're fishing the day after a cold front, and we're catching a few fish on lipless crankbaits, but fishing hadn't been, it's not what I'd term a fabulous day for us today. You know, the weather really affects bass and their aggressiveness a whole lot more so than most anglers understand. But days like this, right after a cold front, the barometer is usually rising, the barometer's high, You've got bluebird skies, although we got quite a bit of wind, and that's favorable. That's helping us some because the bass are a little bit active. But normally right after front, bass tend to get into thick cover, and they're not very aggressive. And as you can see, the lipless crankbaits have the exposed hooks, and the way they're designed, they're not weedless at all. You have to fish these baits in very open water situations or just close to cover. You can't fish them in cover. Now, your billed crankbaits, those with bills on them, the bill acts kind of as a weed guard or a protector, and it bounces off the cover because the bait runs like this, and it kind of protects the hook, so you can actually fish bill crankbaits in thicker cover than you can the lipless crankbaits. But these are open water lures, and the bass need to be aggressive. So those days in between cold fronts or right before a cold front, that's the prime time to fish your lipless crankbaits. Well, I think lipless crankbaits are a lot better, or by far better in clear water where you got good water clarity. But I've caught bass on them in muddy water or real murky water where you can only see down like 3 or 4 or 5 inches. I've caught bass on them. I can recall back a couple of years ago, been actually about 4 years ago, we were over on Kentucky Lake in a bass tournament. And I'd found some fish out on a flat that had some scattered hydrilla. The water was about 3 foot deep, and the water was all over the lake that year. Just about the water was murky, and I could only see down about 3 or 4 inches. And believe it or not, the color I selected to use was a chrome blue back, and the reason being, when the sun's out, much like it is today, that chrome flashes in that sandy colored murky water. It makes a real flash with the sun out when you retrieve it. But the unique thing I had to do, and what I had to do a lot different, you know, in clear water with a lipless crankbait, you want to make your retrieve medium, or sometimes if the water's real clear, your retrieve needs to be very, very fast. But what I did was actually slow down. I was using a 1/2 ounce trap, chrome blue back, and I just slowed down and crawled that bait along real slow, just slow rolled it. I mean extremely slow. And I'd bump the edges of those grass or bump the top of those clumps of weeds, and all of a sudden one would just load up on it and I'd catch him, you know. And I caught a good stringer, about 18 or 19 pounds that day. But I wouldn't have caught those fish had I not had the proper color, that chrome blue back that flashes a lot in the sun, and also the fact that I slowed down. I fished real slow. That's normal though. Murkier water, if you're fishing a spinnerbait, even a bill crankbait, a crankbait with a bill, any lure in murky water, you need to slow down your retrieve. You know, we're fishing a lot of inside grass edges and aquatic weeds here in Toledo Bend and during this video, but we're doing the video, of course, on lipless crankbait fishing, and lipless crankbaits are very effective on all different types of cover, like docks. We have a dock here. Now, Toledo Bend is not blessed with a whole lot of docks, but a lot of lakes that I fish in tournament competition all over the United States have a lot of docks in them. And in particular, in late summer and early fall, when the bass are feeding heavily on shad, I'll take a chrome blueback trap, lipless crankbait, and I'll fish docks. And what I like to do when I'm fishing a dock is just keep the boat kind of out from the dock, position it out from the dock, and get it the proper angles with boat positioning where I can cast the lipless crankbait right down the edge of those docks and just run it right by that dock and try to lure that fish out of the shade or shadows of the dock. You know, bass love docks. They like to get around them for several reasons. They provide cover, shade, and of course the old pilings and stuff along the dock have a lot of algae and scum and moss on them, and the little bait fish get up around there, and that's what really brings the bass under the docks. But docks can be really great for fishing lipless crankbaits on a lot of reservoirs. Now, I've been catching most all of these fish here on Toledo Bend. We're fishing Toledo Bend Lake, and I've been catching most all of them on the inside edge of the grass lines, aquatic weeds. But lipless crankbaits will work in a lot of different types of cover. Now, I've caught a lot of fish out of different lakes in stumps and 3 and 4 foot of water, just stumps under the water or visible stumps, and just bouncing this lipless crankbait off of those stumps. And it's very good, especially in the fall when the bass are feeding on shad real heavily. Another type cover that's really, really good is riprap rock along dams and bridges. Just parallel the riprap, parallel that rock, and bounce this lipless crankbait along that rock in 2 to 3 foot of water. Just make your cast parallel down the rocks. Riprap's extremely good. And another type cover that's in a lot of our lakes is lily pads. Now in the winter when it freezes and it kills the lily pads, the stems are still there in early spring and all during the springtime, and I like to fish a lipless crankbait right through those pad stems and just bring it through there, bumping those pad stems, and I've seen some really big catches of bass come out of pad stems. A couple of years ago in one of our tournaments, one of the competitors won the tournament with 93 pounds of bass in 4 days, fishing a lipless crankbait in nothing but pad stems. So it's a very effective place to throw the lipless crankbait. Let me show you a little tip here, something to do and something not to do. When I catch grass on a lipless crankbait or any other plug, I don't slam the bait in the water to dislodge the grass. You want to reel it in, grab it like this with your hand and just pick it off. It's a lot easier. It does a better job of cleaning the lure. The lure won't work right if you've got stuff hanging all off the hooks and all off the split rings. So you need to get it off there. Do not take the lure and slam it down into the water. The other thing that does, it spooks fish. Now you back in a little quiet pocket like this and you're catching fish. Many times in the past I can recall occasions when somebody would do that, slam the bait in the water trying to get the grass off and spook the fish, and you won't get another bite. So just pick it off with your hands, and that's a good tip. There we go. Boy, that's what it's all about. It's sure fun to catch them on these lipless crankbaits. You know that in the last 10 years, a lot of folks are throwing lipless crankbaits because they are user friendly, they're easy to use. Children, women, just any angler that's not an experienced angler can catch bass on them. Well, another fish on a lipless crankbait. As I said before earlier in the video, these baits are great lures. They're fun to fish with and they're very productive. You catch a lot of bass on them. I hope the tips I've given you during this video will help you to become a better lipless crankbait fisherman and for you to have more fun with your fishing. I'm Tommy Martin.